World War II was a crucible of technological innovation, a desperate race where victory often hinged on having the superior machine. The Allies had the atomic bomb. The British had radar. But the Nazis, they had something that looked like it flew straight out of a science fiction novel. A weapon so advanced, so terrifying, that it sent shockwaves through Allied command and nearly changed the course of the war in the air. This is the story of the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet-powered fighter aircraft. Imagine being an Allied bomber pilot in 1944. You're flying high over Germany, part of a massive formation, the sky buzzing with the familiar drone of propeller engines. Suddenly, something streaks past your squadron at a speed you can barely comprehend. No propellers, just a sleek, shark-like fuselage, with engines slung under its swept-back wings, leaving trails of smoke. It's faster than anything you've ever seen. Before your gunners can even react, it vanishes, only to reappear moments later, unleashing a devastating barrage of cannon fire that rips through a B-17 like it's made of paper. This was the terrifying reality of facing the Me-262, nicknamed the Schwalbe, or Swallow. To understand why the Me-262 was such a game-changer, we need to rewind a bit. For decades, aircraft design was limited by the propeller. No matter how powerful you made a piston engine, there was a physical limit to how fast a propeller could spin before it became inefficient. The sound barrier seemed like an unbreakable wall. But German engineers, led by brilliant minds like Hans von Ohain, were working on a revolutionary new concept. The gas turbine engine, or the jet. The idea was simple in theory, but incredibly complex in practice. Suck in air at the front, compress it, mix it with fuel and ignite it, then blast the hot gas out the back to create immense thrust. This wasn't just an improvement, it was a quantum leap. The journey to a reliable jet engine was fraught with challenges. Early prototypes had a nasty habit of overheating, vibrating themselves to pieces, or just plain exploding. The materials needed to withstand the intense heat and pressure were scarce, especially in a war-torn Germany. Yet, despite these hurdles, the Messerschmitt company pushed forward. The airframe itself was a work of art, featuring a tricycle landing gear and swept wings, a design feature that would become standard on jet fighters for decades to come. When the Junkers Jumo 004 jet engines were finally reliable enough for production, the Me-262 was born. Its performance was staggering. The Me-262 could reach speeds of over 540 miles per hour, about 120 miles per hour faster than the fastest Allied propeller fighter, the P-51 Mustang. This speed advantage was its greatest weapon. An Me-262 pilot could dictate the terms of any engagement. They could climb faster, dive faster, and simply run away if things got hairy. Allied pilots, accustomed to being the kings of the sky, were suddenly outclassed. Their tactics, perfected over years of combat, were rendered obsolete overnight. The armament of the Me-262 was equally fearsome. It was equipped with 4 30mm cannons mounted in the nose. These were low velocity but fired massive, explosive shells. A single well-aimed burst could obliterate a 4-engine heavy bomber. For comparison, most Allied fighters used 50 caliber machine guns, which were like pea shooters against the heavily armored German jets. Some Me-262s were even fitted with air-to-air rockets, designed to be fired into the dense bomber formations, breaking them up for the cannon-armed fighters to pick off. So, if this plane was so incredible, why didn't it win the war for Germany? The answer is a classic story of too little, too late, compounded by a series of critical mistakes. First, there was the interference from the very top. Hitler, obsessed with offensive vengeance weapons, saw the sleek fighter and demanded it be converted into a Blitzbomber, a fast bomber that could strike targets in England. This was a terrible misuse of the aircraft's potential. The modifications required to carry bombs made it slower and less maneuverable, turning it into a vulnerable target during its bomb run. Precious time and resources were wasted on this flawed concept, while Allied bombers continued to pound Germany into submission. By the time the High Command, including figures like Fighter Ace, convinced Hitler to prioritize the Me-262 as a pure interceptor, the war was already in its final stages. Production was a nightmare. The advanced jet engines required rare metals like nickel and chromium, which Germany was desperately short of. Constant Allied bombing raids targeted aircraft factories and transportation lines, crippling the supply chain. As a result, fewer than 1,500 Me-262s were ever built, and of those, only a few hundred ever saw combat at any given time. The engines themselves remained a major weakness. They had a very short operational lifespan, sometimes lasting only 10 to 25 hours before needing a complete overhaul or replacement. Starting them was a complex and dangerous procedure. Pilots had to be careful with the throttle. Pushing it too quickly could cause the engine to stall or burst into flames. This made the Me-262 incredibly vulnerable during takeoff and landing, when it was flying low and slow. Allied pilots quickly learned to exploit this weakness. They developed new tactics, loitering near German airfields and pouncing on the jets as they were taking off or coming into land. The airfields themselves became a primary target for Allied fighter sweeps. It was a brutal irony. The fastest plane in the world was most often shot down when it was moving at its slowest. Furthermore, there was a severe shortage of trained pilots. Flying a jet was completely different from flying a propeller plane. It required a new set of skills and a deep understanding of the engine's limitations. But by late 1944, the Luftwaffe was scraping the bottom of the barrel. Many of the pilots sent to fly the Me-262 were novices with very little flight time, let alone the specialized training needed for such a revolutionary aircraft. In contrast, the Allied air forces had thousands of experienced, well-trained pilots ready to counter the new threat. Despite all these challenges, the Me-262 pilots who did get into the air proved just how deadly the aircraft could be. Aces like Kurt Welter and Heinz Bohr racked up impressive kill counts against overwhelming odds. They became known as the Exbatan, whose skill and courage in the face of certain defeat were legendary. Their combat reports read like a desperate last stand, fighting against swarms of Allied fighters and bombers. Allied intelligence was, of course, terrified. They had reports of this new superweapon, and the initial encounters confirmed their worst fears. A captured Me-262 was a top priority. When one was finally secured and tested by Allied pilots like the famous Captain Erich Winkel-Brown, they were both awestruck and relieved. They confirmed its incredible speed, but also noted its poor acceleration at low speeds and its wide turning circle. This intelligence was crucial in developing the countermeasures that helped mitigate the jet's threat. In the end, the Me-262 was a technological marvel that arrived on a battlefield that Germany could no longer sustain. It was a glimpse into the future of aerial warfare, a future of speed, swept wings, and jet propulsion. While it couldn't stop the Allied advance, its impact was profound. After the war, Allied nations scrambled to get their hands on German jet technology and engineers. The designs of early American and Soviet jet fighters, like the F-86 Sabre and the MiG-15, were heavily influenced by the lessons learned from the Me-262. The story of the Messerschmitt Me-262 is a powerful reminder that the best technology in the world is useless without the infrastructure, resources, and strategy to support it. It was a weapon that terrified its enemies and promised a new dawn of air power. But it ultimately became a symbol of Germany's desperate, final gamble. A beautiful, deadly machine that soared into the sky just as its nation was about to come crashing down. Thanks for watching. If you're fascinated by the incredible engineering and dramatic stories from history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let us know in the comments what piece of forgotten technology we should cover next. See you in the next video.